Did your mother always sit at the top of the table?
Yes, she did. Now, that is not to be interpreted that she regarded herself as the head of the household. As a matter of fact, my father was very much the head of the household. It was really accidental that the sideboard was at the back. And my father, being really an extraordinarily absent-minded professor, except about his work, he was quite hopeless about everything in the house. And my mother did all the serving and from that position. Then I must say we were always included with the guests who came. That table seemed to grow bigger and bigger during the summer months because we had people come to stay with us from India, Australia. We had no money, but my mother had an extraordinary sense of hospitality, and she would add another table on to this already large table. And I always remember she would have 3 or 4 different desserts. Now, it takes me all my time to serve a few strawberries or something like that now.
It's an extraordinary thing in families. Why do you think that happens, that parents let the younger ones away with things that they won't let the older one away with?
Well, I think that when they have children first, the first child is a completely new experience, like the first job you've got. And you're testing your way, and you really don't know what to do, and you want to do your best. So you impose all sorts of limitations, and you try to bring them up in the best possible way, both a religious background and an academic background, etc. And then by the time the second and the third one are, they get more relaxed about it, and they don't get so twitched about it. I'm sure that's the reason. So the eldest one just takes it, and has it. I'm not so sure that that's a generalization, but certainly it was true in my case. And my sister still, she's 7 years younger than I am. I still regard her as totally feckless, which is, it's not fair at all. She's very responsible, she's got a very responsible job, but I'm amazed at some of the things she still does and gets away with, and the way she smokes and leaves ashtrays all around the place, and I just think, oh, God, this is awful.
Do you think she went against you, that she became that way deliberately?
Oh, I think probably, yes, there was an element of that, yes.
Were there
I was a strong... Yes, not so much between my sister and myself, really, because there was 7 years difference. And, of course, during her growing up period, I was away. I was away at boarding school. But I remember vividly feeling resentment in about 1947 or thereabouts. She was 2 years of age. And bananas first came back into Ireland after the war. I'd never seen a banana. I'd seen picture books of bananas, in the encyclopedia, and read all about bananas. And I was dying to have a banana. And, of course, they were like gold. And I think they were given 2, and of course my sister was rather weakling. She was only 2, and my mother sort of mashed up the banana and cream for my sister. I wasn't allowed to have any, and I thought that was really pretty outrageous. So I think right from then, and sort of Rice Krispies came in. She had the Rice Krispies and we didn't, And I think that was the sort of thing that it was difficult. I think there was also a particular circumstance because she wasn't very well. And when she was very tiny indeed, she had her appendix out, and I remember, the great fuss being made of her, and I thought, I wish I had my appendix out, I was about 10 at the time.
Do you feel jealous of her then?
Probably, yes. I hate to admit it, but probably, yes.
Did your mother tell you stories about the good old days in the countryside, or about her family?
Well, we experienced that anyway, because she did come from the country. I mean, she lived at the end of a very long country lane. But we spent a lot of time out there. Just as I go back to see her, she used to push the pram 5 miles into the country to see her mother. And her mother used to come and see us in town. She called it coming to town, Wednesdays and Saturdays. It was that kind of routine. So we did see a lot of her, and we used to go out and spend holidays in the country in the summer. And those really are some of the most wonderful memories. I mean, I still quote them on air. Occasionally people will bring up the subject of the lovely Irish bread, soda farls, which I always have to spell out in England, and wheaten bread and all of that. But you see, that's a great memory for me, because we used to go into the hayfield. It was making hay. I can still see my grandmother coming across the hayfield with this huge wicker basket, and the hot steaming tea, and the soda farls just off the griddle, and the butter oozing out of it, and the jam sort of dripping off it, and it was lovely. So I remember, all of that, great memories. And also in those days, I mean, obviously she didn't have any electricity, so it was the Tilly lamps or the oil lamps. And I was just talking about this the other day, shadows with the oil lamp as you went outside the farmhouse to the outside loo, which was, a little bit away, obviously, from the house, as it tended to be. and being afraid to go out on your own and having to say, oh, Granny, no, come with me. And it was the shadows of the lamp. And even going down the corridors to bed, it was the shadows that the lamp created.
Those stories that you mentioned earlier that they used to tell you, have you a memory of one in particular that had a great effect on you?
Well, there's one that immediately comes to mind, and that was when my grandmother used to tell me about the very difficult times and the very sad and tragic times for Ireland during the Civil War, and how sad it was that people who would be very great friends up till then went their separate ways, if you like. And she used to mention quite a good deal about Michael Collins. She had a great regard for Michael Collins, and they were good friends. In fact, it's not very often realised that the Collins family and the De Valera family, they were very close in that sense. Certainly my grandmother had a great respect for him. She thought, of course, that it was sad that they ended up on different sides, if you like. But she remembered that when he would come to visit, even during those difficult times up to 1922, that he'd always taken interest in the children, Rory and Viv and Maureen at that stage. And that she remembered well his very strong Cork accent, I remember, was one thing, and that he was a very jovial and very kind person. And I think knowing those sort of things about someone gives you a different insight than just seeing someone from a particular ideology or theory. It, if you like, puts the flesh on such theories and approaches. And I think it's important to remember that.
It's fascinating for me, really, meeting you today. I feel I know you, but what I'd love to know is what sort of little girl you were.
Yes. Very naughty, bold, as we say in Ireland, very bold, very
What
wild.
sort of things
and
did you get up to?
Wild and difficult. Well, I was always sort of running away from home, and
Why did you run away?
because not because I was unhappy at home or anything, but because I just thought it would be interesting to go somewhere else, and constantly getting into the motor cars with strange men, and that was my great speciality. I mean, when I think of it now, and how frightening it is for, when one thinks of the protection of children, it's really appalling. But it's also makes you realise how safe Ireland was in 1950. That little girls could go around, just getting into men's cars.
Well, when you decided to leave home, had you any plan of action? Had you a destination in mind?
Well, I would go off and see an aunt or a cousin. I think I was about 5 when I cycled right across Dublin to some relations who were living in North Dublin. I just thought it'd be interesting to sort of cycle on my little bicycle.
What did you loathe about him?
Oh, if you were brought up in an all-female household, which I was, because my English grandmother, was very much sort of acted as my mother's housekeeper, because my mother worked until she married again. And we had a very sort of cosy girl from the country who was, as it were, the maid. It was a very cosy female household. And in comes a man, who sort of shaves and locks the bathroom door and talks in a loud voice. Claire Boylan, actually, in some of her short stories and one of her novels, writes about, noisy Irishman. In fact, he wasn't. He was the most discreet and charming and well-mannered man. But nevertheless, I think it was the idea of this male persona breaking into this lovely, soft, marshmallowy female household. I just found it very painful.
Did you have rows with him?
I wasn't strong enough to have rows with him, but I just kind of sat in the corner and quietly loathed him. I'm sure he was aware of it. He also took his duties as being stepfather very seriously, and I tried not to repeat this pattern, but maybe I did. He would collect me from dances at 10 o'clock. Now, everybody else was allowed to stay at the dance until it closed, so that was ghastly, and he would stand like Mr. Rochester in the doorway waiting to take me home. I thought that was awful, but he was simply being very protective, which, looking back, was very nice of him.
Were you ever jealous of your mother's affection for him?
Yes, I imagine I was, yes. Yes, we were all competing for my mother's attention. She was very strong and very glamorous.
I think that's why my mother was glad that I came to Dublin, because my father and I used to have disagreements, intellectual disagreements, but not terribly profound, and I loved them both very much and miss them very much.
Unwind like the circles that you find in the windmills of your mind.
I'm not quite sure.